Steven Halpern, and Dr. Shealy couldn't make it to today's show, unfortunately. He had some responsibilities, and it's kind of raining outside, so well, certain set of circumstances. But he is doing good. He does want to say hello, by the way. Uh, well, we have the honor of talking with a wonderful composer, creator, and overall amazing human. Stephen,
Yes.
you've been on the program before one time, right?
Yes.
When we were on the radio.
Briefly, when I called
Yes.
in for the birthday anniversary testimonials, and I had a fun one.
Oh God, that was a blast! And that's when we said, "All right, let's get you back in here and let's get you taken care of because you've got a story to tell." So let's talk about a couple of things. Can you talk a little bit about yourself and how you got started? Just a little bit about your life because you've actually worked with Dr. Shealy on a number of projects, and actually back a number of decades ago before I knew him. So. Let's go back to some of those times. Yeah, please.
All righty. Well, I've been working on my own memoir, and part of it has been inspired by Conversations with G by Dr. Norman Shealy. And what it traces is my own journey to find out where this new music came from, how I was able to do it. I was trained as a jazz trumpet player and jazz rock guitar player. So I studied music, did all the left brain things, not classical, but improvisation, and particularly the aspect of tuning in to my muse, to tuning in to the place where the music plays through, not just from my intellect and memorizing fancy scales and phrases, but where the musicians would say going on automatic. Now we talk about it in the flow state. And I had some great teachers back at the University of Buffalo and some professional musicians, and thought that that was going to be the first part of my career as a hotshot jazz trumpet player from New York who was with this great jazz rock band, and all that fell through. I had a chance to come out to California for 2 weeks before I went back to grad school to study indigenous and cross-cultural healing modalities with music, relating to altered states of consciousness, back when hardly anyone was even talking about that, and healing. But I had an experience when I was out in California in a sacred redwood grove in which I started to hear this new music in my head, and magically, I was mistaken for a job applicant at the sister organization of Esalen Institute. And without going into the long story now, I went to the building where I thought I was supposed to meet them. They weren't there to meet the staff to audition, but there was a piano. And I sat down, started playing, went into trance. And about 10 minutes later, I heard some noise. And people said, "Who is this guy? Where'd you learn to play like that?" And that was the beginning of my new life. But part of the question for me was, how did I learn how to play like that? And what I've been learning over the years, which when I was reading Conversation with G, like the page filled with light, and also I heard Norm talk about this at ISEAM conference, I think 2014, where when ideas would pop into our head and we think it's ours, and at one point G said, "So who do you think put that idea in your head?" I said, "So that's how come he's so brilliant." And also, wow, he's going public with this, because I had kept pretty much that private. And certainly when I started, I tried early on in my career after my first album was released to talk about, I didn't even have Sergey, I didn't even have my name on the front cover of the album because it was channeled. And the stores said, "We're not going to buy an album if we don't know who to return it to." So I knew so little about publishing or the music industry, but people were asking for the music. And that's how it got started. And when the human potential field and the field of holistic health really started to kick in 1975 and 76 in California, there was a conference that Dr. Shealy was not at, but he was at the second main one. The mind can do anything. But when I saw that, I said, that's exactly what I'm interested in, but I don't have the money to buy a ticket. So I called them up and I said, who is your music director? And they said, we don't have one. Why would we need one? Well, I told them why they needed one and talked my way into the first ever position. And there were so many other people who wanted to copy that format in their own cities that's how I began being out in public with this new music. I could talk about it from a scientific standpoint. And in fact, the graduate program that I did get involved with was headed by Dr. Stanley Krippner, who I met in that first job position in California. And he said, if you want to be taken seriously, you need to be doing biofeedback research, brainwave biofeedback, GSR, EEG. And then Dr. Krippner said, and Dr. Irving Oil said, another pioneer, forget brainwaves, go into Kirlian photography, aura photography, biofield. Well, talking to the media, it was like I was talking Chinese. And they're looking at me like, who is this guy? He's out in space. And since the music sounded like space music, they said, thank you very much. I get kicked off of, TV shows. And that was it. But in 1977, the second of these big events happened up in Portland. And Dr. Shealy was on big. I had heard of him already. He did his talk with biogenic relaxation, and I was invited to play music live. And it blew everybody's mind. And they said, you guys have to record together. Where can we buy that tape? And I look at Norm and say, well, I'm just learning how to do this, but I'll produce a tape. I put his lecture together with my music, and that was one of the earliest tapes that I put out on the market. Very small edition, but it was showing the combination of words, but also with the music. And then, of course, the music by itself would put people into a flow state, but we didn't have the terminology. We didn't have the words mindful music back then, where you could be at peace in the present moment in relaxed alertness. So we'd use all kind of other words, but that's how I got involved with things. And over the years, would meet different other scientists, be invited to some labs. I'd save up a lot of money and pay for some of my own research. And then, of course, when I take it to the media, I actually had on the set, on TV, what's a brainwave? Do I have it? Now, Sergey, imagine you're talking to a host on TV and they ask you if they have a brainwave.
Oh my God! You know what? That's what a question.
I was diplomatic. I come from New York, but I was diplomatic, and I'm realizing people, certainly in 1976, 77, in the early days, but even through the 80s, get no information on brainwaves and how their body is working, let alone on auras and biofield. So when I'm talking about hemispheric coherence and synchrony, brainwave synchronization, brainwave entrainment,
yes,
they're looking at me like I'm from Mars. And but that's how I got into it. And having no money, but being invited to all these other events, we'd like to have somebody talk about sound and healing, and you're the only guy. So I had the field to myself for a number of years, and I was going to cities all over the country. And that's part of how I put the field of sound healing on the map. I would write articles and wrote the first book on sound healing that I call Tuning the Human Instrument, primarily to promote my music, because a lot of the program directors on TV and radio said, we'd love to interview you, but we only interview authors. So get a book, we'll have you on. So I wrote a book, quickly printed it up myself at Kinko's, and got on some of the shows. And that was the beginning of sharing also not just information about myself and the ancient use of healing music, but also I had just come back from London, the first Festival of Mind, Body, Spirit, where I met Dr. Hans Jenny's followers and learned about cymatics. I was introduced to his research and saw the slides of cymatics making sound visible by projecting, right, projecting sound into a vibrating, like a drum head or a steel plant. The technology was invented hundreds of years ago by Ernst Chladni, but nobody knew about it. I learned about it from Carl Jung's book on mandalas. So I knew what it was, but there was no information. It was in Europe, but secret. And it was suddenly public, and I'm going, this is some of the visual evidence, the sound evidence that sound isn't just something pretty, something you could dance to, or all the, the simple things, but sound could literally move molecules. Sound can move energy. And that was the key, and it blew everybody's mind. So that's how I got into it and started speaking at the early science conferences when Dr. Shealy put together the first American Holistic Medical Association. I got invited to be a charter member, made a presentation, and played the music live in concert at the event. And that's how our connection began over the years. We've been at a number of other conferences over the years, and I have always been so inspired by his chutzpah, by his ability to speak straight and to say, this is the truth. These other people, don't know what they're talking about. And the other thing I love about him, he's always right. So,
Yes. Oh my God, Steven, it's talking to you is just it's wonderful. It really is. May I ask you a couple of questions?
Sure.
Growing up, when did you first figure out that you wanted to go into music? How old were you?
I got my first real taste of music in grade school playing trumpet, but that was just reading little black dots on white paper written by dead white musicians. It was kind of boring. My first day in high school, where I'm in ninth grade and 10th grade, and there were seniors. There were two guys improvising jazz, Dixieland jazz, playing without reading notes. And I go, how is this possible? So I went right up to the trumpet player and said, how do you know what to play? And he said, you play what you feel. And I remember saying, but I don't feel anything. How do you know what to feel? And he says, well, you got to learn these rules and learn these scales, and these phrases go with these chords. Who's your teacher? He gave me his teacher. I started studying. And that was the beginning, but it was always something I was going to be doing in the background. My high school guidance counselor said, well, you don't want to be a lawyer. You don't like bloods. You can't be a doctor. How about a dentist? So I go, well, I'll take a liberal arts program in undergraduate. But I was thinking as a freshman, because my family dentist worked 3 or 4 days a week and took long weekends every weekend. I could play music on the weekend. I didn't expect to have a career in music, but it was where my heart was at that point. But that was jazz. And as things continued through freshman year and then sophomore year, unlike you, when I hit chemistry on organic chemistry, it hit back. And my brain did not, it was totally left brain, right brain. And I said, I'm either going to fail or I'm going to switch majors. And the other relevant major for me was psychology, except they were into rat psychology, not humanistic psychology. But the sociology department was open to me. So I got in, and that also left me the most freedom to start studying all these other things. And one of my faculty advisors was saying, before Joseph Campbell made it famous, follow your bliss. What are you really into? The Vietnam War was raging, so I didn't feel comfortable in dropping out of school, although some of my friends were, based on philosophy and principle. I said, no, I would not be a good soldier. The army would be better off without me in it. And I told them that, and happily they believed that. And with some other, nothing like wearing black velvet pants to the draft induction board, and everyone else is in their white boxer shorts or their briefs. I stood out and got in trouble, but ultimately it worked out okay. But there's no way to make money in music. So I would teach private students. I'd play in bands, and thought that was going to be my career. The band that I was in Buffalo was a great one. We were not seduced, but we were signed to a contract to record in New York City. The band came down from Buffalo. We were going to be the next Chicago of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. They switched producers on us who tried to change our music. Well, you don't tell the four biggest egos in Buffalo and the four best musicians how their music is supposed to sound. So the band broke up in the recording studio, and I have uh, 2 weeks of unscheduled time. Let me hop a plane. I always wanted to get to San Francisco. Friends had gone there. I have my trumpet and guitar with me. Got on a plane the next morning, and I'm ready to jam. And it was in that 2 week period that I had my life changing experience. But again, there's no way to make a living other than playing with bands, and it was barely breaking even every month. But it was at that point that that first job opportunity brought me in touch with Dr. John Lilly and Dr. Stan Krippner, who were leading weekend seminars. And when the staff said, "Oh, you have to listen to Steven's new music," I'd sit at the piano and go into trance and play the music. And they would say, "Yes, we see everybody meditating. We see, you know, them relaxing, but you need to prove it with objective data. You need to do biofeedback research." And Dr. Krippner was out there because he was becoming the director of the Humanistic Psychology Institute. And he says, "We'd love to have somebody do research like that. So if you apply, you're guaranteed accepted." And I applied and got in, and I was only one of two out of 100 graduate students who was doing any kind of research. Everyone else was into marriage and family counseling. And it was that research project looking at the evoked auras, the electromagnetic energy field around fingertips when people would listen to my music and the most relaxing classical music, that I blew the classical music out of the water. It was like a scale difference of 100,000. The visual imagery, the GSR was different, and people would, instead of being stuck in their beta, and I'll come back to this in a second,
Yes.
they were shifted into alpha and theta. And Randy Fonts, one of the researchers, said, "This is no longer just your research project. This is your life. You need to share this music with the world." So I'm going. And so I thought, great. I went to the media, went to newspapers, and they said, "Get out of here. We don't know what an aura is. We don't know what a break." So nothing happened for a couple of years until I'm doing concerts, and people would say, "Where can we get an album? We want to have this music at home." And that's how I kind of backed in to starting my first record label and making my first recording. But it was all seat of the pants, lots of mistakes, and there was no field of healing music at that point. There was no way to make money. But after getting to that first big conference, I started getting invitations. And I remember asking one of my colleagues, who was a public speaker, says, "I'm paying my own plane fare and hotel, and I'm losing money doing benefits for other people." He said, "Well, start charging." And I remember the first time I said, "Well, I couldn't do that." He said, "Well, you're not going to be able to go anymore because you don't have the money. So yes, you could do that." And Sergey, the first one was, "I need plane fare." And then I need plane fare and a little honorarium. And then they told me that what professional speakers do, you boost, if you're working double the amount that you need to, double your rates, and then you'll be still in balance, decrease my own stress. So that's how I started doing. But I was still working almost every weekend from 1977 to 1985, when I experienced burnout and had to get off the 1983 experienced burnout, and then didn't start up again for a couple of years. But that's how I got involved, and that's when it was suddenly a career. The other thing I'll mention is, if you went to a store, a health food store, a metaphysical bookstore, or a music store, back when there were music stores like Tower Records or Discount Records or Warehouse Records, there was no section of New Age music, let alone healing music. So I was the first one to go to those stores. I was the first one to bring my first album to a metaphysical bookstore. And the owner looks at it and says, "We don't sell music, we sell books." And I said, "I have bought every book in your library, and I have a bunch that you don't have. This is the music," and I remember saying it, "this is the music that Edgar Cayce was talking about. He predicted there would be healing music in the new in the new century, in the 20th century, and just then a little old lady who overhears the conversation walks up and says, "Oh, music for meditation! I need some of that." Grabs the album out of my hand, and the bookstore owner says, "Well, I better try a dozen." And then I go to the next store and go, "Hey, your competition just bought a dozen albums. You better get some." And that's how I started learning about, marketing 101 on a very small scale, very unsophisticated, and but was able to begin to get the music out there in a way that nobody else did. And quite frankly, necessity is the mother of invention. I'll say this: I had a meditation in late 1975 when I had no money, uh, and the meditation says, "Learn about business or starve." And back then, as a student of the '60s, business was evil, all that aspect. So I said, but he said, starve or learn about business. And the next octave of that was not only learn about business, but learn to love your audience. When one of the marketing consultants, Jay Abraham, taught us that hadn't occurred to any of us, that we would actually love, that there was an aspect of love in what we're doing. What a concept. That was early on my internal shift, that I understood that this was not about me. The jazz music was basically, and all the jazz musicians, even the great ones who were also getting into the zone and channeling, there was a lot of ego. When I started playing music on piano and electric piano, there was no ego. I wasn't a trained piano player. I played basically simple music, but that was the key. And one of the phrases that popped into my mind was, spirit and healing is not necessarily impressed by complexity. Your human instrument is not impressed by complexity. Sometimes the simplest is the best. Let me give you an example. So, for all the people who are listening right now, one of the things that I discovered that I didn't even realize I discovered for many years, and how significant it was watch what happens when I sing this little phrase that you all know. Become aware of the feeling and the tension in your chest. Be aware of what you're feeling mentally and in your head when I sing, and also with your breathing. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. And how many of you are holding your breath right now until I go, do? So I call that scalus interruptus. And some of the people got the sexual double entendre, some of them didn't, but they were all holding their breath and realizing, as I pointed out to them, that most music that we are familiar with is based on pattern recognition. We know where the music is going in the future. We project and predict analytically with our left brain. And if you're in left brain dominance, you're not in a holistic, balanced brainwave state. It was so simple, and yet nobody had figured that out until I put it out there. My graduate professors hated that. They say, we built our careers on our left brain. If we accept what you're saying, and I had them say this to me, our careers have been a waste. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, Dr. Wells, and I said, get out of my office. But the reality was, people know about me, they don't know about him. And I when I would take my music to Time magazine and send samples to Newsweek and show them, yes, we love Mozart. I love the masters, the classical masters. And I'll mention something else about that in a second. But they were not composing for health and healing, to balance the energy fields. They were not composing to get you into an alpha state or a mindful brainwave balanced state. Very different. And if you, it's just like, how many people drink coffee to help them go to sleep? It's the wrong
Right.
drug.
Exactly. I'm going to jump in here for a sec.
Yes.
Wonderful, 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 and there's so much to talk about. Stephen, I think we got a 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 shows coming up based on just. I mean,
Yes.
if we just unpackage everything we just said in its full glory and wisdom, my God, we got unlimited content here. Oof, wow, blew my mind, man. So here's the thing. A couple of things. Let's talk about the brainwave states because this is really super important because we want to talk about science. I'm wearing a white coat, so I guess
Yes,
technically,
yes.
this is science, right? Okay, let's talk about beta, alpha, theta, delta, actually, and gamma. There's also gamma. But I would love for you to give me your perspective on these things and how you utilize them, because again, I talk about that often in terms of languages of the brain and how the brain and the brain and the rest of the body. There's no separation between the brain and the body. We're all holy, and we're all completely holistically connected. So please.
Right. So when I got into the graduate program that I mentioned with Dr. Kripnam, part of the uh, benefit of that is that Sonoma State College at that point, the Humanistic Psychology Institute, had the best biofeedback equipment in Northern California. There was great equipment at UCLA, but I'm in Northern California, not in Los Angeles. And what I found is that, like, I'm naturally in alpha and theta all the time, more than most people, as I found out. That's part of why I'm a little unusual in certain other aspects, but that's part of what I was born into.
Well, that's what makes you you. That's perfect.
Exactly. So I start doing research and I read, like everybody else, that scientists first discovered the brain's electrical pulsations pulsing between 8 and 12 cycles per second, and they called that alpha. The next range that they discovered, they just named them alphabetically, beta, between 13 and 39 cycles per second. I mean, approximately. Some
Some say
websites
yeah,
give
to
different,
30. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, I mean,
but in that range. And then there was
yeah.
the next one was delta, which is down 1 to 3 in the sleep range, and then theta between 4 and 7. And where I do most of my composing is naturally in a state of very deep theta and 8 hertz alpha, particularly if I'm tuning into the Schumann resonance, the Earth's basic fundamental frequency. There's more current research going on in terms of gamma, but a lot of disagreement that I see out on the web. And as you probably might have noticed, there's a lot of people that put out information on the web that put out their opinions and call it facts. So part of my career has been about uh, doing my own research. And I said, okay, so if I would like to know, and I want to know, can I tell the difference if I'm meditating where my brain is pulsing at 12 cycles per second, or 11, or 10, or 9, or 8 in deep alpha, or 7, or 6, or 5, or 4 in theta? I go, well, I know how to do brainwave entrainment with binaural beats, because we all learned how to do that. It's fairly simple. It's simpler now that we have computers, but we would just, in the early days, we would slow down the tape recorder so that it would be a difference between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, so we could actually dial in. If I want to be meditating and entraining my brain to 8 cycles per second, I make the difference, let's say, between a tone of 100 cycles per second and 108 cycles per second. And
Perfect.
that would lock me into alpha.
Yep, I just want to just jump in real quick here on the alpha and how this works. The binaural beats, the things that you're talking about. I was actually on the board of advisors and research IRB committee of the TMI, which is it's the original institute that from Robert Monroe.
Oh yes, of course.
So that's how I came across Norm initially, because I came across his stuff. It was brilliant. Oh my God, this guy is incredible, and he's a neurosurgeon. Anyway, it led to deeper stuff going down. But it's I'm not sure where I was going with that, but yeah. So that's actually literally it is the language of the brain. The binaural beats. For the folks out there, just scientifically, how do you create a binaural beat? Technically, it's a difference between the two tonalities, in other words, or a frequency, I should say, that is a certain type. It's the difference is in 8 cycles per second, then you end up at 8, which is basically, as we said, it's a certain range. Now, if you end up in 4 cycles per second, then now you're in theta. If you end up in cycles per second, now you're in delta. And it's overlay. It's not just one frequency for the human brain to comprehend something. It's rather it's a whole orchestra, so to speak, isn't it?
Right.
Hmm.
So I was familiar with journeys out of the body, but hadn't really experienced the technology. But I was invited when I met, at that point he was called Brother Charles, and he was Master Charles, who had been a personal secretary to Swami Muktananda in India. And he set up his center not far from where Monroe's Institute was. And I said, well, if I'm going to be doing some work at a concert with Master Charles, let me drop in and have a meeting scheduled with Bob Monroe. So I visited, we talked about doing some research, and he said, I'd like to license your music. But he had all these cassette players that would, do his work, but he didn't have an engineer to fine tune the speed of the cassette players. So when you'd hear music, it would sound like this sometimes. I said, Bob, you can't do that to my music. It would be fine for the frequencies and the fake ocean sounds that it was using, the wave.
Yes.
Because you couldn't tell if that's a little slower, it wouldn't matter. But with music, and when I hear my music, when someone messes around with my music, Sergey, there are a few things that get my ego. If you mess with my music,
Oh, God. You and I get the same concept. If anybody messes with the concept of holism, I go full. I mean, hey, I gotta stand my ground. This is what I stand for.
Right.
Yeah.
And you guys have a.
Actually, we got a question coming in here.
Okay.
By the way, there's one back here that says, "Love Steve Halpern's music." So do I, by the way. That makes Norm as well. By the way, he says hello. I think I said that. Question: what frequency is needed to heal colon cancer in the ascending colon near the ileocecal valve? 5 to 6 centimeter in length, and how much time at the frequency is needed, please? Actually, interesting question, because I am a colon cancer stage 3 plus. I'm supposed to be dead from 07 to 09. Well, here we are. That was my turning.
Wow.
That's when I woke up. But a good question. Let's talk about frequencies and healing.
Okay, a couple of things, caveats as we get into this. There's research going on with that, but not a lot, because it was illegal to even do research like that for many years, particularly if one is not a medical doctor. I'm not. You are. I based a lot of my early, my own research and my understandings on the work of Dr. Roland Hunt in England around the 1900 era. And what he did was describe the chakras of the body as areas. And like on the cover of my Tuning the Human Instrument, if you have an organ that's within the colon area, you're talking either orange or yellow. So what he said is the diseases, let's say of the liver, would be, and he says, so look at the disease, it's yellow jaundice. If the liver is not functioning right, that would be a keynote of E. And there were music therapists say, well, therefore, all you need to do is play a Mozart symphony in E. And as I very quickly pointed out to those people who didn't know anything about music, you can't just see what the title says, because every classical piece of music goes through all different keys. And that's part of the beauty of classical music. What the body needs is just one key frequency. That's what I was doing with Chakra Suite. Each song is one frequency. It's based like on Indian music that is based modal. It doesn't go through all the chord changes of Western European music. It stays in one tonal center. So that's one aspect. But it's still kind of frowned upon to give easy answers to what key frequency or what music. But which is why the first album that I did that originally was called Spectrum Suite. And because when I called it Chakra Suite in 1976, people didn't know what it was. What is a chakra? But I built on research that relates the colors of the spectrum, colors of the rainbow, the 7 keynotes of a major scale, the 7 colors of the rainbow, the 7 chakras.
And 7 major energy centers in the body.
Boom. Exactly, the energy centers. And according to many researchers, there are tonal frequencies that relate to those frequencies. So if you're starting at the keynote of C, that would be at 256 cycles per second, or an octave, which would be like 592. And a D would be somewhere around 290 cycles per second. So those, you can look on the internet and find all those frequencies, but it's not just the frequencies, is what else is going on with the music, what's going on with the instruments that are chosen. I would never play music like this on certain keyboards that had a dissonant sound. You couldn't play this on a trumpet, would not be healing. But the electric piano, the special electric piano that I had, I was the first one to really play that instrument as a solo instrument instead of as a jazz or jazz rock funk instrument. And the music, the instrument is basically a series of tuning forks that I play with a keyboard with my fingers. So the tone is very important for the answer to the question. And then is what is the music? If you're playing music in that key of E, but it's all very Western classical, you might be focusing too much on the music rather than allowing the musical energy to recirculate through your body. So there's some information I have on my website that people might find helpful. And then you need to, each individual needs to find that which works for them and hang out with that. You may want to use tuning forks. You may want to use, get a crystal bowl. You only got one tone, but if you get the right tone, and it might relate to, if you buy crystal bowls, you could often now request, I want a crystal, quartz crystal bowl in the key of E. And then you could play that yourself. You could hum along with that. You could om along with that. And that would be something that you could do for yourself. So it's not music, but it's a frequency. And of course, there are electronic frequencies. The Rife device used different things. There was the cymatic therapy device that might be helpful. And they each of them might have their own individual frequency analyses. But the concept is that every organ, every molecule, every atom, molecule, organ, and cell in the body has its own signature frequency. And that was, again, going back to Hans Jenny and his research and some of the other pioneers who put this out there. When I got introduced to that, I heard Dr. William Tiller, the great scientist who only recently passed, at that first conference. And I extrapolated some of his words to my phrase that I just mentioned, that I took his quantum physics aspect and related it to music. And that's how I understood that I was working with music as a scientific frequency device, but I couldn't call it that. So I just call it pretty music or meditation music. And now we were easily allowed to call it healing music. But I think I mentioned this to you. In 1978, Representative Claude Pepper in Florida was trying to outlaw, just like the fundamentalists and the Republicans about trying to outlaw all abortions now. They were trying to outlaw hypnosis, guided imagery, guided visualization, art therapy, and music therapy, and particularly healing music. And I remember joking in my lectures, if you're tired and you listen to music, hey, from the 60s, we close our eyes when we listen to music. Imagine getting busted. Officer, I wasn't visualizing anything. I was just tired. I closed my eyes. How would they know? Finally, that was beaten out. But just just about a year ago in February, the FDA comes out with a new ruling and says, as they said to us in 1993 when I was at a meeting, CDs, Mr. Halpern, are you a medical doctor? I go, no, I have a PhD. He says, doesn't matter. You're not a medical doctor. Your album says your music can evoke the relaxation response. I said, yes, it does. He says, well, according to FDA guidelines, that is a device. So your CD is a device affecting the structure and function of the human organism. And basically he said, you're a deep shit. And I said, well, what can I do? You're going to put me out of business? He said, maybe. Take all your albums off the market and get rid of any word that says healing, anything about the relaxation result. So I do. I almost go out of business. And then the Republicans take over Congress in 1994, and they quiet down that department of the FDA that was trying to get rid of those devices and those concepts. And I would joke about this for the last 30 years. And now all of a sudden, the consultant that I did dark field microscopy, looking at the motility of red blood cells as a
Yes.
function of stress.
Yeah, functional blood analysis, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
She now consults full time for the health food industry and manufacturers to make sure their labels are compliant with the new FDA laws and rules. So I had to go back and work with her to strip out certain words from my CDs, change certain words from my website. And would you believe that one of the words that they don't like now is brainwave entrainment?
Ooh, but that's the basic. That's what it is.
Exactly. And I said, hey, all music entrains your brain.
Right.
You can't not your steam radiator, a ticking clock, any of these will entrain your brain. It will a grandfather clock so powerfully entrains your heartbeat that when I had my first meeting with my graduate professor in grad school, I'm at his house. He has a big ass grandfather clock. I'm going crazy. My chest is hurting because my heartbeat doesn't want to beat like that. He leaves the room. I get up, and I've never been near a grandfather clock, but I see the big pendulum going. I grab it, and I stop it. Blessed silence. I can take a deep breath. My stress level goes down. He comes back in the room from being in the bathroom, freaks out, starts yelling, kicks me out of the house. I thought I was going to be kicked out of the program. How dare you touch my grandfather clock? He's addicted to it. His body likes it. My body does not. So that's where every individual needs to take what we're talking about and verify it for themselves.
Actually, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. As we say, actually, Nicholas Tesla, if you want to understand the universe, energy, think of energy, frequency, and vibration. And I think there's several quotes from Albert Einstein, but we got a bunch of questions here, which is wonderful. By the way, there's a quote here that says, loving what we're learning now. So am I. I'm in school right now, and this is great. Thank you, Steven. Now, another question, can you suggest music for paranoid schizophrenia? Now, I'm always careful about that because binaural beats and how do you be careful around fragile states? But those are the people that you need help.
Right. But because I'm not a trained MD or a psychologist or psychiatrist, I don't make, there are certain things that I can answer and certain things that are not my field of expertise. That would be one of them for exactly the same reasons. But I know that many of the therapists since 1975, when my first album was out there, like Dr. Virginia Satir, who work with these fields, have used my music as part of their support mechanism to set the ambience for spoken therapy. But now there's also other things. In fact, I found out just very recently that the field of psychedelic therapy that uses entheogens like psilocybin and mushrooms and some other things are having some very great benefits with the situations that you just mentioned. So I would refer that person to that sort of situation to find a therapist who's conversant with that, and then using music like my Chakra Suite or Deep Alpha or Sound Healing 432, my happily now my best-selling albums are also the most therapeutic, which means that people are figuring it out on their own, even if they don't get a chance to read the liner notes or read an article that I've written or hear our lecture. They hear the music and something internally goes, yes, I need this. And they self-medicate with the music.
Wonderful. There's a couple of questions, I think, along the same line, which is, I think after the question is, can you suggest music for paranoid schizophrenia? There's another one, or one of your CDs, and there's another question to help with the voices. I understand the same line of questions.
Okay.
Do you have any general suggestions, or is there anything you'd like to say on this?
There was a little bit of a glitch. So I heard something for parents. So let's go back to the first part of the question.
Paranoid, okay, yes, definitely glitch. Paranoid schizophrenia.
Right. That I answered before. I can't deal with that.
Yes. Now, if a person is hearing voices, let's say that's yeah. Now, obviously, that's an internal auditory stimuli of some sort. Again, there's different levels to human. There's spirit, soul, mind, body, and then you can have physical, mental, emotional, physiological, chemical, otherwise. But there's also, but then again, I'm going to jump in with something about the voices, and of course, unless somebody is hearing the voices that are negative or harmful, or basically just self. And
thank you for saying that. Go on. Yes.
Causing harm. Voices are not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I hear voices in my head all the time. I mean, it's not just, let me clarify, of course, before I get hospitalized or institutionalized. In other words, there's guidance. I've learned to literally just shut down that ego, and talking about ego versus flow, and just to be in the flow. When you're in the flow, I'm kinesthetic primarily, so sometimes it's not always voices, it's just knowing and understanding. But sometimes, for example, I avoided one near crash. I mean, I had a bunch of car crashes in my time, but there was one time that and I was doing the speed limit, actually, and so the voice told me slow down, and I didn't hear, I didn't understand, and then it was louder. I was like, okay, that's very unusual. I almost turned around to see who's in the car, and I slowed down, and then there was the vehicle that came around the corner and just would have clipped me at a very high speed. So, I mean, and these things have happened to me for very frequently now, and I'm listening now. I'm listening clinically. There's a number of situations. I'm in a hospital. I'm literally looking at somebody. Their lab values are technically okay. There's no criteria to do anything, but this is going to go bad. I got to call somebody. I call somebody, they yell at me, and then 5 minutes later, the patient crashes, and the same person says, "Why didn't you call me earlier? I have a record. I called you 5 minutes ago." I mean,
yes.
That's. Mm-hmm.
Let me pick up on that. I've spoken with a number of doctors and psychologists about that, because some of them will talk to me because I've been out there a bit, and so they know I'm safe to talk to. And they say I can't, and even executives and CEOs said I can't tell my business associates this, but I could talk to you about it because you know about this. That's what happens to me. Or you don't actually hear a voice, but you get that feeling.
Yes.
Slow down. I don't usually hear voices, only very rarely, but I'll get a knowing and a feeling, and I've avoided accidents in the same way. And a lot of people have that sensitivity, but we're trained to squash it. We're told it's bad rather than to work with it. And that's where Carolyn Mace and some of the people that Dr. Shealy has worked with have developed their sensitivities. So there are medical intuitives and psychics. I'm sure you know some. I know some, and people want some people who work remotely. Yes. I work with someone now, and she does remote acupuncture as well as picking up on, okay, I have this pain over here in my knee, and she'll work on her end and says, well, you need this herb, and she'll do something on her end, and my pain goes away. She's in Florida. How is that even happening? Non-local consciousness, and your left brain is saying this couldn't possibly be true, and yet you go, wait a minute, but I feel better. She's 3,000 miles away. It is possible. It is true, and that's where you have to break through what we've been conditioned and programmed to believe our own internal senses.
May I jump in with something and tell
Please.
me how you feel about this concept? Because I think you just might be the right guy to have this discussion. Now, I had a radio program before we went to podcast, still same concept. And I talked about the matrix of the world, the matrix of society, the matrix of the government, the culture, all of these structures, the healthcare system, what we think is health, all of this artificially created concepts, and yet listening to the inner guidance and not listening to voice. And yet there's this amazing, great design. And I can do better than the creator. I mean, but I can try to understand. I can do my best to understand what the creator meant and follow the same pathway. And that's what holistic medicine is all about. So, how do you feel about that concept and the fact that we have forgotten, led away? We haven't forgotten. We've been led away the concept and the original design into
That's
this.
exactly what is happening. And it's not just in medicine and in psychic discussion, but if you go back several thousand years, uh, at a certain point, everybody, in the tribal societies, just about everybody was tuning in. They all had their own receptivity. And then the priestcraft took it over. Before that, the women were all healers and had, we call it women's intuition. Well, men had it, but we were told, no, you don't. And then some of us said, well, I do have that. In fact, before I really had it and recognized it, I was praying to have it. And in fact, it was one of my friends in the band who came to me and back in 1968 says, I'm hearing voices and you're the only one I could talk to. And I told her what was happening and she became a spirit medium and then moved on from there. But she was the one that took me to Lilydale. And I had a reader at that wonderful summer community who said, you're going on a long trip. You're going to write some new music. Now, this is August 1969. I have no money. I have no plans to go anywhere. I'm writing jazz rock songs. It's not new, but they're good. And 3 months later, when I'm on a plane and landed in California, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. This is what the Saki said. How did they know 3 months before I knew? I didn't know until the day before I got on the plane.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when my whole world view started expanding and going, how is that possible? Well, I don't maybe know all how, but it is because it happened to me. And that was a life-changing motion.
Let me ask you a question. So, what are your thoughts? What do you think? What do you do when people talk about New Age music? Now, obviously, there's the good stuff. Obviously, there's the negative. I mean, there's criticism. There's all sorts of stuff that's surrounding. There's people who basically look at New Age music as, well, much like the conventional medicine looks at holistic, obviously. And but tell me about the pros and cons. In other words, let's talk about music as it is now in this world and what your take on it.
Well, as an elder statesman in the genre and as one of the architects and the founding fathers of New Age music, I was playing what I heard. There were other musicians that were also beginning to channel new music. Dr. Shealy knows Yassos and some other musicians. But then when within a couple of years, when people, other musicians, saw that people liked this sort of thing, said, well, I could do that. And they play their same classical music, but say, I meditate, therefore it's New Age music. Or they do fake New Age music that still was very rigid, very left brain. But and then the record label said, we'll just slap a label on anything that isn't disco, rock, or that doesn't have words, and we'll call it New Age. And one of the main people that was complaining about that was me. So I got in trouble with so many different people. But who were trying to put the whole New Age music, and there were some companies that specifically put bad things out there, called it New Age music, to denigrate the whole field. So there was actually a strategy of destroying the genre. We see some of that happening now in the Grammys. That's another whole aspect where they do. I've had people, big time people, say, we don't want people like you in the Grammys. We don't want people like you playing that music, etc., etc. They're afraid of it. Some of them are because they're born again. There's a book that lists me and Shirley MacLaine as the two ringleaders of New Age philosophy, and I'm the number one worst New Age musician. And I'm reading that. Number one, they spelled my name right, so I think better read this now. And I said, so why are they calling me? Because I know who I'm working with. I work with forces of light and angelic and spirit, higher dimensional, beings and frequencies. They said, the author says, the reason Halpern is so dangerous is he plays music and people use it for guided visualization. And we know the only guided visualization does not come from within. That's the work of the devil. It comes from Jesus Christ. So if it doesn't come from Jesus Christ, it's the work of the devil. Talk about black and white, my way or the highway. So I am listed there, and I'm reading that and go, that's not true. But I'm not going to get in a fight with that, preacher. But at least I understood where they're coming from. They're in such fear-based, and it's a threat to them. if you empower the individual to take responsibility for their own healing, which was the hallmark of holistic health, taking responsibility for your own health and well-being, then you're a threat because you're taking their power away by taking it for yourselves.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now we're going to go a little bit over the hour, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
We can. I feel like going for like 20 hours here, but I mean, I think it's going to be
do a
wise.
part 2 in the future, right?
Yeah, definitely come back. Just want to kind of throw in some of the things that, some of the similar concepts in the holistic medicine approach. So Dr. Shealy talks about lots of different things and how the institutions and everything else have done their best to destroy the concept of holism, literally. And some of the ways you do it is, first of all, Dr. Shealy, my dad was. The first time around, he would announce any major discovery, research based and everything else. He would get shut down for years, and then later he would be no, not a brand new discovery. This is he's already been out there, but it's now you're for whatever reason you're hearing it. And the second thing is just how the industry will do terrible things. And for example, just as you said, the word integrative, general, wonderful concept. Who doesn't like to say integrative? I like to integrate things, right? But what does that mean? What does that mean? If you have as Dad says, if you have if a hospital has a foot massage, basically in one of the rooms in the closet, and whether they use it or not, that's integrative. Is that holistic? No, it is not. By the way, I'd like to ask you a question. What are your thoughts on Dr. Shealy's biogenics? Because right now it's actually we've updated the program. And we actually put it online. Literally, because we used to actually offer this as a workshops for people to come in for a couple of weeks, but with the COVID and all this, all the travel restrictions, actually, I'll tell you, it was one of the best things that ever happened. Literally, one of the best things that ever happened. We couldn't have groups, we couldn't have people coming in, we couldn't out for several years, and we used to travel to conferences. Dad and I, we used to present to different places, and then shut down. So we had to go in and do some internal work, kind of like reevaluation. So we put everything online. We never thought that was going to work, but it's a beautiful thing. So there's guidance, concept behind it, and of course the exercises, frequency, words, and now you've come across biogenics, have you?
Oh, sure. Well, that was the first tape that I produced with Norman's voice and my music. It was a biogenic relaxation. And let me say this, there's at least two kinds of people. In the old days, we called it type A and type B. The type A was the racehorse person, and type B was a slow. Now we call it ADHD, for me, adult ADHD, high functioning ADHD or whatever. Going back over my life, there weren't diagnoses because that wasn't even identified at high school. But I was like always in a race to be the first one to finish a test. I wasn't in competition with other people. That's just how I'm wired. So for people like me, taking 20 minutes, it was excellent when I could do it. But on my own, if I weren't, in front of somebody, maybe I only last 5 minutes. So I was looking for things that could work for 5 minutes, which is why I started doing some of the other music that I've done for myself to get me into a state within 5 seconds. But when you look at, if it's your health, and I say this to myself as well as to my audiences, if you can't take 20 minutes to reset your own metabolism, to reset your nervous system, to honor your body in a way that it likes to be massaged internally, and how your brain likes to be orchestrated. And as pioneering researcher Gene Houston said, we could self-orchestrate on the spectrum of consciousness. I heard that in 1977 at the same conference in London. I said, that's what I want to do. I don't want to have to go to someone else's office. I want to be able to do it at home by myself. And biogenics gives you a way to do that. So it's so powerful, but it's so simple and it's so inexpensive that people say, well, how can it be good? It doesn't cost $1,000. And it works. That's what I would say about that. It's a powerful modality, and people should explore it.
Thank you for being a contributing, force in this whole thing. My God, it's such an honor. I wish I had known you back in those days, 60s, 70s, 80s. I mean, I wasn't born then, but I was on 70s, but, I think I miss some of the better days where it's but just to kind of ask a few questions so that people can get the resources and can follow you. How can people find you? To ask more questions, to get more information. This is obviously not the last time we talk.
Great.
Yeah.
I have a website, which is Steven Halpern Music. That's StevenHalpern music.com. If you put a PH in there, you'll get some heavy metal guy that's not me, or some real estate broker in New York. And people, don't go there. I don't do much on Facebook, but people can tweet me, and my colleague will forward those to me. But you can email me at info@innerpeacemusic.com. And the way to also read things, I have quite a bit on my website that people can read, and also listen to all the music, like the albums Deep Alpha, Deep Theta, Chakra Suite, sound healing albums, and also the music that has subliminals. And if you go to my website, you could click on the image, and you can read the liner notes, the booklets. A lot of information. Instead of writing a lot of books, I write booklets. And so on every album, it explains what's going on, how to use it, how subliminal affirmations work. And so those are big. And then where in the last couple of years, the big revolution is YouTube. So I post a lot of the new music on YouTube, a lot of the tracks of major albums. There's at least one video for each album. And I'm working on the ones that are older that don't have videos yet. But that's where they could go. You could write me in care of the website, email, or tweet at Steven Halpern. And that's a great way to be finding out more about this.
Wonderful, wonderful. You are a resource of tremendous value. And actually, there's a few questions that came up that I might not be able to address it. For example, there was a question on is there a specific music selection or frequency for autoimmunity and so certain other conditions. They will want to jump into that really quick before.
Yes.
Okay.
So let me say that the answer to that is not just one frequency. That's why I have the 7 main frequencies in Chakra Suite, but also the album called Sound Healing 432 Hertz, and albums that also have subliminal affirmations engage your own consciousness to amplify the effect of the music, to focus intention, which of course you could do on your own. But what I have learned, and was again one of the pioneers in the field of adding positive subliminal affirmations, positive short statements that you don't hear, but your subconscious perceives. So it's not just a frequency, but it's a context, and it's a reality, and it's a gestalt that when you get into an alpha or theta state, your cells and your intention resonates more powerfully in your mind to activate your own healing energies. In fact, when I was doing my research, I was connected with Itzhak Bentov, who wrote the book called Stalking the Wild Pendulum. And he points out in there that when you get your body into that state, a whole host of beneficial situations cascade down. Your brain goes into high coherence, synchrony, your chakras align, makes more effective use of energy. Your body likes to be in that state, and it's a natural high. So as a veteran of the 60s, I said, a natural high, I could do it myself. Tell me more. And that's how I'm still able to be alive at this point, because I had a doctor tell me in 1980, if you don't learn how to manage your stress, Mr. Halpern, you're going to be either dead by the time you're 50, or you'll be paying so much money in medical bills. And I said, I got no money, doc. He said, well, then you better learn how to manage your stress. I said, I better take my own medicine. I better start listening to my own music. And I did. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Wonderful. And actually, I did want to ask you this earlier. What is the success rate, or how do you measure the success of your endeavors? In other words, the sound healing. Do you keep track of numbers, the statistics? In other words, or do you have people sending you feedback in terms of what they've had? How do you know that what you're talking about has?
Well, starting from day one in 1975, I would get letters. But, a lot of people don't write letters or postcards or whatever. We had little bounce back cards that were inside each CD. That was a place for comments, and people would tell me things. Now, sometimes people email me or tweet, but most people never take the time to do that. When I would go to these conferences and speak, or was even at my sales booth with my records or LPs and CDs, people would come up and tell me things. But I can't write this down, or I can't say this publicly. Some famous people that said, "You've saved my life," but I can't say that publicly. So I would have that going on. And now what I understand is the most and the more important proof of that is the amount of streams. Well, in the streaming music digital revolution that started in the year 2000 when Napster was ripping off all of us musicians, now there is a setup. We don't get much per play. When you listen to a track of my music on Spotify or Pandora or Amazon or iTunes or Apple Music, I get 0.001, a thousandth of a penny. So I was getting checks for 32 cents 5-6 years ago, a month, from Google. Now there are millions of people listening, and when I look at the amount of plays, and some of this is out for the public. In fact, people know more about it than I do because I don't pay as much attention. They said, "Did you know that track one of Chakra Suite got 40 million plays?" I go, "No, 40 million?" Well, that's how I know, because people wouldn't be playing and going back over and over and over if it didn't work. And they don't get to read the liner notes. They don't even know why, but what they say to me back when they would write letters or postcards, I don't know what it is, but I listen to your music. I'm more relaxed than I've ever been, ever. I can sleep better. And all these things that are exactly what I would said, but they never read what I said. They had their own experience. And that means that the music is speaking to them and they're paying attention and they get it. So that's how I know. And the fact that my royalties have gone up so much from where they were 5 years ago, because people have discovered it. They tell their friends it's a playlist. People post playlists. They tell their friends. And now people don't have to buy CDs. They could just punch in my name to any of these places and they could listen to that music all day for free. The difference now from 20 years ago is us musicians get a little bit per play, but when you have millions of people listening, it becomes better, in my experience, better than it was when I was selling LPs or CDs. And I still sell CDs because I'm old school. I want a CD to listen to where I want, when I want. I will not listen to a cell phone, but whatever works, that's what you need to do, because it works if you do. And that's the beauty. You just need to honor yourself, take the time. It's like exercise. As you know, every article says, if you're over 50, exercise is the most important thing you could do. If exercise was a drug, the FDA would either outlaw it or insist that everybody does it. And I'm still kind of ADHD. If I do 5 or 10 minutes of exercise, I did my exercise for the day, and then I read the articles, or I talk to my friend. Oh, I just was out for a walk for an hour, and I'm going, an hour? How do you have time to do that for an hour? Well, so I've been changing my world around a little bit so that I'm taking more time, or I got a Nordic kind of elevated treadmill. So I'm finally learning how to watch something, and 5 minutes, 10 minutes is easier doing that, or 20 minutes, than 5 minutes without anything. And listening to music, as everyone knows, but if you listen to music, in 1978 and 79, I was doing research with Dr. Patrick Flanagan and Dr. Sheldon Deal, the chiropractor. And even though weightlifters like to have heavy metal music to pump with it, when we listen to my music, they could pump more weight, but they didn't think they could because they wanted the big drum beat. But their bodies said, we are stronger with quiet relaxation music because that engages all the faculties of the body. But it's a hard sell because people have been trained to do to the beat. Just like if you go to a restaurant, you go watch people chew, eat to the beat because they're in training to music. The FDA hasn't outlawed that, but you could just watch it happening in restaurants.
Absolutely. And Steven,
So
please
watch
promise me.
what you listen to when you eat.
Oh my God, absolutely. Make me one promise, please. Make sure you take care of yourself. Exercise, nutrition, sleep, rest, stress, all the stuff. Because here's the thing: you're a wonderful, amazing human being, and you're well. When I think this kind of concept as Dr. Shealy has been on the holistic medicine side. So I mean, you're literally on the same page. I mean, coming in from a music perspective. So please stick around for a long time.
I intend to, and that's why, 20 years ago, it wasn't that relevant. But now that I'm 75, it is. So my thinking and my life schedule, I take some time now before I get to the office, and I take some breaks during the day. So I may not have a whole hour, but I fit it in. And I like the medical reports that say you don't have to do it all at once. You could do 10 minutes here, 20 minutes here. That works for me. And so, yes, I'm with the program now.
Great, and we'll certainly be talking more. And I do want to say thank you to our friends and supporters here in Springfield as well. There is a wonderful store here, Spring Valley. Great service.
Yes.
They carry some of Norm's favorites. I mean, he talks about it all the time: youth essentials, magnesium lotion, everything, literally, and wonderful service. Great people. So that's one way to get our products. Another thing that I'd like to say is, and this is another one of Dr. Shealy's dad's favorites, is tart cherry juice concentrate. From Coloma company, wonderful company, wonderful nutrition, it tastes great, and that's been literally drinking it for decades. I mean, that's he got me into it. So I mean, it's good stuff. Anti-inflammatory. Lots of benefits, and I don't see why not. If you're not getting your veggies, do something, but please get your veggies. So that being said, Steven, I got no words. Thank you. It's an honor, and we'll have you back again if you're.
I look forward to it. Blessings, everybody. Stay tuned.